Hi and welcome to this series where I'm going through the ITIL4 practices individually, and I'm going to be giving you the main headline points you need to be aware of, all in order to help you support your base knowledge all around ITIL4. I'll also discuss some of my real world applications of this practice in various organisations, so stay tuned. I'll be providing real world examples. Don't forget, subscribe to my channel, click the bell, you'll get those updates. Okay, so let's get to it. Today I'm going to be covering off service level management, which is from the service management practice. Quick reminder, practice is a set of organisational resources designed for performing work or for accomplishing an objective. So let's get straight down to some terminology and some framing points all around service level management and service level agreements. So the target state here is one of outcomes. It's not just output, it's business outcomes. So you may go, okay, what do you mean? Well, first off, no, this is an important distinction, and it's nicely linking in to the ITIL fundamental guiding principle, which is around focusing on value, i.e. look at the business that you're in, look at the organisation, look at the outcomes they are looking to deliver. What's the value that they are looking for? Rather than just look at output as a single view on life. The target state for your organisation here is around understanding your customer requirements, their expectations. Clearly you don't want any misalignment here. You want to be building, nurturing, maintaining relationships, but also trusting relationships as well. Trust's really important, and you're providing a clear view of the IT services that are being delivered. You're providing an end-to-end view, a holistic view. That's another ITIL guiding principle. So we've got two of those already, and we've hardly started. It helps provide your BAU support and your continual improvement activity. Very, very importantly, the state you are looking to get to is one of customer experience, your CX element there. The other point, and I suppose just as a reference point, a framing point, is around design thinking. Now, quick plug here, I have done another video on design thinking earlier and design, so do check that out on the channel. But it's really important you look at the human behavior of users. How do they operate? What are they looking for? What does it look like? So when you're taking a fresh look at service level management and service level agreements, SLM, SLA, when you look at your approach, really take that design thinking to heart. In practice as well, just again, just a general framing point around service level management overall. I've worked in organisations where service level management and service level agreements have all been generated by the vendor team, the vendor management team, or the procurement team, or the contract team, perhaps the legal team in some organisations, which is okay to a certain extent, but it's really important you engage with the business. And what I mean by that is you speak to users, you get the business's view on the people that are using those systems, those IT systems, those IT services, the people that are using it day to day. What's important to them? What is it what's the outcome they are looking to achieve? You do need to apply some logic here and some interpretation skills as well, because people are going to have different priorities, different outcomes that they're working towards. So perhaps frontline staff may have a different view, because they're customer facing, they may have a different view than I don't know, somebody in accounts, for the sake of argument. So if you've got remote mobile sales staff traveling around the country, their business activities, their outcomes, their priorities are going to be different than Dave, who works in accounts all day and sits in an office. So you do need to consider human behaviors, that there's a strong element of design thinking you should apply here. But I think it's not always a good idea that if service level agreement, service level management is just managed by procurement, by a contract, by a legal team, by the vendor management team. You need to get and you need to engage and ask your users of the system. So let's get down to a couple of terminology points. So ITIL4 talks around the purpose of service level management practice, SLM. It's about it's setting clear business-based targets for service levels and to ensure that delivery of services is properly assessed and it's monitored and it's managed against these targets. We'll come on to that in a bit more detail shortly. That's great. So I hear you say, okay, so you said service level. What is a service level? What's the definition of a service level? So that is one or more metrics that defines expected or achieved service quality. According to ITIL4, the SLA, the service level agreement, it's a documented agreement between a service provider and also the customer, and it identifies both services required and the expected level of service. I like to keep it simple. For me, I think, well, it's what company or person A will provide company or person B when you're talking around a contracted service. The key point here, and perhaps stating the obvious, is that they have to be relevant to your organisation and what your organisation has as a vision, what's important to them. Don't just go with what the service provider tells you should measure and you should report as a practice, or perhaps you've come from another organisation and you measured X, Y, and Z, or your service provider is saying, well, other organisations in your sector measure this, and this. Boil it down for yourself into what are the key business outcomes in the particular organisation you're working in, and that will really help you know, and that will help measure and maintain. Service level management provides you that end-to-end visibility. It's that holistic view of perhaps you've got a service map or a service model, and you've got all the various components in there, ranging from the infrastructure, the networking, the database, the application, maybe you've got data center in there, whatever it is. It's that end-to-end integrated visibility of an organization's services. So why do it then? Well, it's giving you a shared view of the services and a targeted service level with customers. You are meeting a defined service level by performing this activity. So you will go through a collection, an analysis, a storage and reporting activity, and you will report on those relevant metrics for the identified services. You'll be performing service reviews. Now that can either be internally or that can be externally. So if you're a service provider, you may have a monthly service review with your customer, for example. In some organisations I've worked in, I've been that individual that's representing the service, and I will go off once a month and speak to the finance director or the operations director or the claims director or whoever it is, and I'll perform an internal service review. So it's about building those relationships within the organisation and the customers, but making a formal service review in place. And then part of that is you are reporting on the service issues, the performance, and you're measuring those against what the expectations were as hopefully an outcome based, but typically it's an availability or it's a timing type activity or a percentage type activity. Things are changing. When you look at service level management, the skills and the competencies for service level management includes things like relationship management. So if you recall, that's from the general management practice. Business liaison, business analysis, that's from the service management practice. And commercial or supplier management. Again, that's general management practice. Think about the role competencies. Now, there are role competencies that ITIL4 talks around in terms of leadership, administration, coordination, communication, methods, techniques, and technical experts. I always remember that as LACMT, LACMT. But think through what's going to fit here for your organisation. What you know the organisation's culture. You know what's going to work in terms of what kind of role competencies are the most important here. It's really important you look at the big picture for this practice. Look at that end to end, that holistic view of things. Don't just look at a service as an island. It's not. If you've drawn, hopefully you've drawn up a service model or a service map, and you will see that you've got your application in there, you've got your networking infrastructure, you've got servers, perhaps they're physical servers, perhaps they're virtual servers, you've got some cloud in there, maybe there's a bunch of service providers or internal teams, you've got a data center, maybe you've got multiple data centers around the globe, you've got client software, client technology, databases, etc, etc, etc. The point is you must look at your service from an end-to-end and holistic perspective. Again, it's another guiding principle within ITIL4. Let's talk service value chain for a few seconds. Service value chain, as a reminder, that's right in the middle of the service value system. So your service value system, you've got your guiding principles, you've got governance, that service value chain right at the core, your practices, there's 34 of those, and continual improvement, all delivering value. If we look at the service value chain, which is right at the center of the service value system, I like to remember it as PIDOD. So there are a bunch of activities that are within the service value chain. PIDOD: plan, improve, engage, design and transition, obtain and build, deliver and support, all resulting in a product or a service, which in turn will provide that value. So for service level management, the main activity areas are plan and engage. It does contribute to all areas, but especially plan and engage. So what to consider around SLAs generally? Well, stating the obvious, it needs to relate to something that you are selling or providing that's available within your service catalogue. It must have defined outcomes. Now just meditate on that word for a few moments in terms of outcomes, not outputs. It's the outcomes, it's those business outcomes that's important there. And don't measure metrics for metrics' sake. Are they balanced? Have you got a good level of customer outcomes in there? Maybe a CSAT activity and a business outcome in there. So what you don't really want to be doing is just defining metrics for metrics' sake. So you know the end result is that's interesting. Well, apply the so what technique. You've had 5,000 incidents this month. Great. Is that more or less than last month? What does that mean by comparison to the previous year? Are we up? Are we down? What does it mean? So what? Does it align with contractual agreements as well? So is it clear that your service level agreements are in line with the service provider and the customer? And keep it easy, keep it simple, no jargon in there. Let's not make it complicated. For years and years and years, this has been a really complex area, difficult to understand, lots of jargon in there. Keep it easy. If you had to explain it to an 8-year-old child, would they understand what that metric is, what it's actually doing? So just no jargon, keep it easy, keep it simple to understand. Some real world examples, and I've been in IT for a good 25 years and been on both sides of the fence here in terms of presenting service level management practice activities to customers and generating them as well as being the actual customer. But Some of the most obvious ones you always think through: service desk activities or operational metrics or applications and availability. So maybe you've got your typical service level agreements around P0s, P1s, P2s, P3s, P4s, and that would be an hour metric of some kind that you will fix a P3 95% of the time within 15 hours, just as a random example. But you would have your incident management metrics. Perhaps you would have some other first time fix or first time resolution type activities. Abandonment or time to answer metrics again are useful items, but clearly CSATs are an important. I like to see not only what percentage of people are actually responding to CSATs, but also what is their experience. Is it good? Is it bad? And this is a really good way of countering something called the watermelon effect, which I'll talk about in a few moments. But make sure you've got the customer's view of what's going on. Not just, okay, we had this many calls that we didn't answer, or we answered this many calls within X amount of time, or we fixed this many issues first time, or we received this many incidents and this many service requests, or X amount of change requests. Think through the customer side, think through your reference design thinking again there. Think from your customer's perspective. You don't want a misalignment as to what you're reporting versus what your customer actually thinks. Usually as well, I quite like to see operational metrics in there. So perhaps if you've got an AWS or an Azure cloud, for the sake of argument, what's the agreed availability? What what kind of backup percentages are being maintained? What about comms? What about just sort of availability of services overall from an infrastructure perspective. I mentioned watermelon effect a few moments ago. So speak to your customer. So the whole idea of this watermelon is, if you can picture a watermelon, it's green on the outside, cut it in half, it's red. So the analogy there when it comes to service level management and service level agreements is, when you look at it, everything's fine and rosy and green, but actually if you scratch the surface or you dig a bit deeper, it's bright red. But the point here really is speak to your customer. So I mentioned CSAT response rates, for example, and what the CSAT response is. That's a really good metric there that you can use. You may well be meeting all your service level agreements of responding to incidents in X amount of time, or your availability may be, whatever it is. Great, but what does it mean to a customer? And your CSAT ratio or your CSAT response rates is a really good way of kind of teasing that out. I've personally worked in a number of organisations where I quite like to build relationships further afield outside of IT and get the actual real world user experience. In fact, in one organisation, I relocated myself for a period of time into a different country and into a different department. It was a claims department in another, well, it was another organisation, another country, and the reason I did that was to really experience the service firsthand. So I was representing the service that was being delivered, but was I really experiencing it from a regional office perspective? So I set up camp and worked in that location for 6 months. The benefit there is I could really see from the customer's experience perspective, were we helping them? Was it a good CX experience? Were we really helping business outcomes? I have to say the answer was no in this particular example. It wasn't a good customer experience and it wasn't a good business outcome. But that was only through physically getting to understand what was the service that was being delivered. The metrics said something quite different. The metrics said everything's green here, nothing to see, move on. that was not correct from a business outcome. So really consider that CX and that UX experience. So again, if we just think through what's involved around service level management and service level agreements, there's a lot of collating, there's a lot of working through, there's a lot of understanding and analysing data and information and reports. You've got a number of areas where that information is available, the customer engagement, you've got your customer feedback. I mentioned CSAT, for example. So you may have some kind of workflow or process within your ITSM tool that says when we resolve an issue, an incident or a service request, it automatically sends out a link to the user to say, hey, how did we do? Complete this questionnaire. Or maybe there's a link to a portal or whatever it may be. But other sources of information, you've got business related measures that will be in place, you've got operational and business metrics. Use this information and build out a decent reporting model practice. Some parting thoughts really around the service level management and service level agreement area. Your target state is one of outcomes for your organization. It's understanding customer requirements and expectations, building, nurturing, maintaining relationships, having good, trustworthy relationships, having a clear view, crystal clear view of the services that are being delivered, but also a holistic view of that, not just the service, but holistically. And then, good insight into your BAU support and your continual improvement activities. Very, very, very important is your CX element into all of this, your customer experience element. And then don't forget, you should be applying design thinking in this area. Map your SLAs to business outcomes. It couldn't be clearer. So business processes mapped to business outcomes, and this very nicely meets with one of the guiding principles within ITIL4, which is around focusing on value. So those outcomes, look at business outcomes, map to business outcomes, not just the single view of life, which is here's the output. Avoid situations if you can where your vendor management team or your procurement team are solely involved with agreeing those service level agreements. It's really important that you get the people that are using the IT service, what's important to them, what's their outcome, what's the business outcome that they're working towards. There's a danger that it just turns into a statistic game. It's 85%, it's 90% in 6 hours, it's 65%, it's less than 5%. Fine, you need that element, but don't get wrapped up in the statistics all the time. You have to focus on the business outcomes, and my experience previously has been that it's very statistics driven, and while that is absolutely important, you must focus on, are those metrics business outcomes, or are they just statistics for statistics sake? Don't measure for measuring sake. Key questions finally to ask: so what? So when you get a metric, when you've got a piece of information, so what? What does it mean? What did it mean to that office in Paris when that P1 went down? It's great you're telling me we've had, well, perhaps it's not so great, but it's interesting you told me we've had 5 P1s this month. Okay, but what does that mean? What does it mean in terms of productivity? What does it mean in terms of deadlines? Did it mean we couldn't ship goods? Did it mean there were contractual penalties somewhere that we had to exercise a penalty clause, or we incurred a penalty clause? So what? Don't just get tied up in the percentages and the numbers. What did it mean to the business outcome? Could they not get the goods out of the warehouse, for example? Okay, that's it. I'll continue to post information around service level management, service level agreements, and also the general management practices, service management practices, and technical management practices. Please do subscribe to my channel. Thank you.